This is a Loosely Coupled show with James Hickey and Derek Martin, where we talk about software architecture and design. In this episode, James and I talk about our personal experiences in various projects and domains.
Yeah, I guess, the idea you had, I guess we could just run through some of probably the major projects that we've worked on in the past. I suspect you probably have more stories than I do.
I don't know, maybe not. It's just, the reason I thought of it too was because, and I've been trying to do this more on YouTube, on my YouTube channel too, is even on my blog, is that I feel like some of the not war stories, but like those stories about just projects, the domains you've been in, how they worked, how they're similar to other domains. I don't feel like that ever gets talked about. The only place I ever hear those types of things at, one of them was at the Explore TDD conference, and which makes sense. I guess that's why it would, like, a lot of those talks were probably happen there, is because probably the kind of shared sense of that's needed. But in the whole of the industry, it's not like you read about this stuff on, people's blogs or Medium or Dev2. It's like I feel like it's not really talked about a lot. And I think in my experience, I guess in the stuff that I work on, I think the benefits I've had of being in one domain and correlate or trying to transfer some knowledge on how it works in other domains has been, to me, invaluable. Like, I don't know. I think that's probably one of the best things that I think that has ever happened in my career, is just being in different domains and seeing different things, and then coming into one that I'm completely new in and thinking, okay, well, that one did it like this. Yeah. Why does that do it like this? Is there some reason? And then just understanding, I guess, how they relate a little bit and how they do things differently. But I would say that they definitely relate fundamentally more than they're, different. Yeah. All companies run them. Like, even in what I'm in now, I'm in transportation now. Yes, all companies operate differently-ish. We always say, like, we always got to make our software so it's can be run, because everybody does it a little bit different. Like, they all have this little tiny bit of difference on how they do things, but fundamentally they're all doing the same thing. Yeah. I just thought it was an interesting idea. I'll let you fire away with what do you think is the, I don't know, is the most interesting, or maybe you got from the most? Like, what do you think is the project or domain or problem space that you worked on that is the most memorable, I guess?
That, if you were to ask me if there was one project where I was stretched the most, where I learned the most overall, that definitely there's one, right? There's a big one that I think really kind of propelled me in a sense, but it and we can get into what that was, but I wouldn't say after that my competency after that project was still not not anywhere near where I'm at now, but so I think they're probably relating to careers in general. My experience, and this is probably not the experience of everyone, my experience is maybe this is because I've worked on product teams, and I've also worked on professional services, so building smaller projects for third parties. So I've had instances where it's I've been given this new big project to kind of work on or lead or whatever, right? So that was really a challenge, I guess, right? Where I can see maybe if you stick with like a product kind of team, especially if it's like a developed stable product, I guess maybe, then I can see maybe that opportunity not happening, right? Um, Unless maybe you switch companies or whatever. So, I mean, yeah, as far as like domains go, the first job I had was doing this enterprise, in quotes, enterprise software um, in the automotive sector. And this was doing a lot of like financial stuff for automotive manufacturers. So the gist was like kind of their biggest benefit, I guess, or their biggest feature, or whatever you want to call it, was kind of the or use case, I guess, that they solved was, let's say you're a franchise owner and you own like a Kia dealership and you own a Honda dealership and a Ford dealership and what maybe more, right? So, and that's usually the way it is in the industry. You have like one company or one person who owns multiple different brands dealerships. Um, so there's a problem in those. How do you compare the financials from a Ford dealership and compare that with like a Kia dealership? Because it like in the actual industry, the way Ford does its financials and accounting is different than how Kia might do them. So which basically ultimately it comes down to like account codes. So Ford's accounting for like vehicles sold or like trucks sold for the year might have like a corresponding code for Kia. So you could literally be like, let's just compare trucks sold. But a lot of times it wasn't that simple. It was like Ford had a bucket of like these categories, trucks and cars and compact and whatever falls under this account code. And the Kia might have that same bucket split up into like a bunch of other individual codes. So then this software had to like somehow, be intelligent enough to match those. That was really like the core of the whole thing. Like that was really like, this was a huge, huge system, but really that was like the main thing it did. So yeah, I mean, the way that worked was basically they inserted this intermediate library, so to speak, which was basically like generic accounting codes. So they basically they took like the lowest common denominator of all the codes for all the companies. The way they could do this is because on staff they had lots of people who like worked in the industry. They had people who had worked at all these dealerships, and so like subject matter experts. So these people knew what the accounting codes were, and then they would work with the brands to figure that out too. So yeah, I mean, they basically just like had these codes that were lowest common denominator, and then you could kind of map, right? Okay, all these codes map to Ford's version, and then these map to Kia's version, and then just run some calculations to figure out how do you compare this to that. So yeah, I mean that was very, very interesting, and I've seen that in other industries too.
That's what I mean. It's like they're the same, but they're different. It's like they all like there's nuanced differences, and then that's just an interesting problem space. I never necessarily would have thought about that because for sure, even around here, I think about it's like a few people own essentially all the dealerships. It's like what I mean. It's like a handful of people own all of them.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. The one that is been the most enlightening, I guess, to me is I was working on a project for manufacturing, specifically to distill it down a little bit, in my area here around automotive, it's a lot of tool shops. So they're making the tools or they're making dies, and the are all. I really don't know what to classify this as. I don't even know if it necessarily has a term, but I'll call them like it's project work basically. So you kind of the process is you have a GM, Ford, Chrysler, whoever it is, Honda. It could be outside of manufacturing. This is applicable, or outside of auto. This could be applicable. So you have somebody that needs something made. They basically give you it's not even it could be a drawing on a napkin almost, or like a ridiculous picture that basically somebody's got to estimate how much it's going to cost to basically build a tool for it. And then you got all these bids. So basically you bid on something. Then if you get the work, then it goes through this whole work process, like operationally, to actually make that tool or whatever it is that you're making. There's a lot of revisions in that. It's not just like you get a spec and you make a thing. It's you get something to start with, essentially. And then there's a lot of iterations. So if you're in software and you're thinking this sounds familiar, I'll keep going. So you have a lot of iterations. You have a lot of they call them change orders generally. And then you have tryouts, which are basically whoever purchased the tool literally tries it to see if it's meeting whatever specifications you want to in terms of defects and how often defects are occurring, blah, blah, blah. So then you go through more iterations and then till final kind of delivery type thing. Now, that in and of itself is like project work. You could say that is software project work. You get some idea of something of what you're going to build, some requirements of like feature set of what it's going to be. You bid on it, some RFP of some sort. If you get that work, you probably spec it out to some degree. You have a lot of change requests through the thing if you're doing some iterative development. Like, it's exactly the same thing. It's literally exactly the same thing. Yet nobody seemingly recognizes that exists between software. This exists when you're in automotive tooling. This exists in so many other industries. I'll give you another one is like custom home construction. It's exactly the same way. There's all kind of other industries that fundamentally boil down to the same concept of project work, where you are bidding on something and you have a pile of change orders. Some companies or industries works purely on to make money off the change orders, so that the bid on something without even caring whether they're going to be like that accurate in the quote or not of what it's actually going to cost, because they know once they do get the work, there'll be so many changes and that they'll be able to bill the customer or charge the customer exponentially because of all the changes, which is crazy. But
which also happens in the software industry,
correct
and
too.
Professional services.
It can, yeah.
I've seen it.
Yep. Same thing with homes. Like my brother-in-law's in the home, and I talked to him about this and comparing it, and it can be similar. They don't have the changes like this. They have more allowances. They do it a little bit differently, but you could if you talk to somebody in that industry, you'd be like, oh, why don't we do that in this industry? It's another topic, but yeah, I just cross-pollination of industries. I'm assuming I don't understand why it doesn't happen that much of stealing ideas on how stuff works. We always compare it to automotive, which is insane. When there's so many other industries that are very, very similar in how they work that we don't even look at seemingly. But the one thing that I learned, I don't know, I thought was really interesting about it is, and I had a blog post about this a long time ago, and I think this is the comment I'm about to make is, and I might have made this similar in one of our things before, is that and I got to be very clear on how I'm saying this, because I think people are going to be very, if I'm not clear about this, will think I'm an idiot. Is I think software people that are really into software and writing software, I see this comment all the time, is like, don't bring me solutions, bring me problems. I'm a problem solver. Right? It's like I agree with you. You should be immersed in the domain. You should understand the domain so that you can solve problems for the domain writing software. Agree with you. But, huge but here, to think that you are the domain expert or that you are the problem solver, you're just one of the problem solvers. And I get this feeling a lot of times when I see some of these comments is like that people think there's some sort of like domain wizards here of like that they've been in the industry for so long that they understand how these things really work. And I think on the surface, sometimes it's really easy to see a solution, but it's not the solution at all. And I think you really need to dig in with people in the industry, like what you're trying to solve, and really go deep to figure out what the problem is. So I'm going to give you an example is, and this happens for any project work that I was describing, any industry, this is probably the case. If they're really busy and you have to quote or bid a lot on work. So if you're in the business of you're getting proposals and you got to basically bid on proposals or on RFQs, and you got to bid on these things. If at any given point in time you have somebody tell you, well, you know what, in order to get more revenue, get more work, we need to be able to be faster at bidding. I can tell you right now that is not actually the problem. The problem isn't bidding faster, right? You could build a solution to make it easier to bid, right? Make it faster to bid so you can get more bids. It's like, well, we can't throw enough hooks, you know what I mean, with worms out. We want to throw a net out so we can get more work. What if that's not the problem? What if the problem actually was that you're losing money on some jobs and you should try to be making money on all your jobs? What if you're bidding on work that you never win? Right? Like, why wouldn't you rather the work that you are doing, that you are getting, like that you are winning, trying to maximize the margins on those rather than trying to get the onesie twosies and losing money on some and making money on some and just optimizing the work that you're actually working on? But it'd be very easy on the surface to say, oh no, let's create a net because we need to get more work. It's a strategy, but is that really the problem? Is that you can't bid fast enough? Not only is it that you can't bid fast enough, I would be curious to know if people are listening to this that are in having to estimate. Have you ever estimated work knowing what you estimated prior work that was similar? Now, you may say, like in software, oh, nothing's similar. Well, actually, a lot of stuff is similar. We just want to think everything's unique, for one. But in other industries, a lot of things are very similar. But you'd also be shocked to know that there is no feedback loop between, in a lot of places, of what the stuff you did. So if I bid on project A and I get it, I work on that project, and we end up with a, say, 5% margin. If I bid on a year later, almost the exact same project, and I have no idea that I did that project a year ago, would I bid different if I did know about it? Most places don't know.
Yeah.
They know by the people that are bidding. They know by the actual what's in the heads of the historical stuff of what people know, which is exactly what most people in software do. They're estimating purely off of their own experience on what projects do, not empirically on how something went, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of that stuff that in that domain is like, oh, this is everywhere. And it made me think about how problems on the surface and what the solutions are. Um, yeah, a lot of times I think you got to go a lot deeper than what you think the easy solution is that may be really apparent. It's not really the root to what the problem is.
Yeah, so like we were talking about, I started a new job 3 weeks ago or so, and I was brought into a discussion about just some like that like here's a list of issues that potentially are seemingly unrelated, and we could build features to like like this, build a feature for that, build a feature for that, oh, build another feature for that. But they had taken the time to actually like think more holistically about the problems, and try to think about like one solution that addresses all of it kind of together. And so that, which is not typical, which I think every software developer knows. What I described, the first thing I described is like 99% of companies do.
Yeah.
And then you end up getting like a really fragmented product, and I think everybody knows what that's like. So yeah, that was interesting to see, and I think so this kind of dovetails with kind of what you're saying about how the industry you're in, there are a lot of the industries with project management, like workflows, I guess, whatever you want to call them. You can just take what we're doing in software and kind of apply it on top, so to speak. There are a lot of the problems that have already been solved in our industry.
Yeah, I mean they're different, right? Like they do them differently, I guess, in other ways. So now the product that I'm working on now is part of that is a whole change management. That's kind of like a whole main piece of the product. So if you have people who want to change a thing, then they have to go through a draft, add stuff, delete stuff, whatever, and then once they're ready for that to be like submitted for approval, then they get to see kind of the difference between the two states. So like here's what it was before you changed it, and here's what it is when you did change it, and then that needs to be approved by somebody, and then that gets applied to kind of the master, so to speak, and then everybody sees that, which is basically Git. It's GitHub. I was gonna say.
Yep. So it's really neat, because this piece of the product is pretty much like GitHub, but it's like all those concepts applied to a whole other product, a whole other industry. So it's really neat. And what I was talking about with kind of having those list of problems and then having one solution to address those, the solution was really a lot of issues around like collaboration and things like that. There's just a solution where it's like, this is GitHub. Like this is GitHub, but
no,
like
that's cool though,
a different industry.
Yeah, you can see the translation of how one industry is using something in a particular way, and you can just see how it transfers in its usage somewhere else. It's
like just like an example, right? Like think of like you're an because one of those big project I had mentioned that kind of had the most effect in my career was in the life insurance industry, and that's kind of a common industry, I think, to bring up in like software development conversations. I mean, imagine you're like you are kind of part of that process of approving a insurance policy. And yeah, it can get really complicated, right? So it's like how old you are affects whether you smoke, your gender, where you live, past medical issues that we've had. Yeah, I mean, there's just a ton of things that it's like, if you're between the age of 18 and 25, then you'd like take this whole other like route to do the process. And then if you're over 30 to 40, then it's like a whole other set of rules that you have to follow, right? So it gets complicated. So what the product does is it helps you manage all those like manual process, like human processes. So like in some industries, those processes might change a lot. So how do you manage that? Well, it's just like software. You have software that, the code base changes a lot. How do you manage that? Well, it's like the collaborative part of that is using Git and then doing pull requests, being able to like review changes and
Sounds
diffs,
familiar.
which I've already described. Yeah. And it's like literally it's the exact same thing, but it's like applied to how a business does their like their back end processes, their back office processes, whatever you want to call it. So it's yeah, and it's and again, it's like it's not what you were saying, like, oh, we think we're software developers and we're problem solvers and we know how to fix things. Like these are solutions that have been collaborated on, so to speak. Collaborated with people in the industries, right? Like it's not, let's just make stuff up, right? It's, hey, like here's a solution. What do you think? Like, how would this affect your business? But
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
I feel like I need to clarify myself of like the whole I'm with that notion. Don't get me wrong. It's just I think that without having really deep domain knowledge, you're not going to get to the root cause of the problem by
yeah,
yourself. And I think a lot of people obviously advocate that, like I've been saying, be immersed in it, be talking to the right
yeah,
people to really get to what the problem is. But I think just at a superficial level, you won't be solving what the problem. You're band-aiding the problem. I feel like I've seen enough
yeah,
of it now over and over again where it's band-aids, not root cause fixes. And
yeah,
maybe root cause fixes don't need to be there all the time. But when you're trying to develop a solution as a competitive advantage, like, and you think your competitive advantage is, I mean, one thing, or like eliminating this barrier by doing this one thing is going to be the be all
yeah.
end all. I just don't know as a developer, especially if you're in an industry or you're a domain that you don't really know it that well, or maybe you think you do, that you're really getting the full picture to really know really what the problem is.
I think I suspect developers who have actually worked alongside either customers or with like in tandem with people who are working with the customers and who are saying, I have this problem because customers can't do this thing or whatever, right? Like it's like if you don't dig deep into those conversations and you're not asking lots of questions, then like you said, it's just going to be a feature factory,
Pretty
right?
much, yeah.
Every time there's a problem, you're just going to make a feature to fix that problem, and it's like there, like you said, yeah, there could be just this whole other root cause, and that's just a symptom
Pretty
of
much, yeah.
some other issue, which may not even be technology. Like that's the solution may be
Yeah.
your salespeople need to pitch differently, or
It,
your onboarding process with customers. You just need to like tell them up front, this is how it's going to be, and
Yeah, I
you
think
know,
I think there's
like,
like magnitude of things or reasons. I think it's just that collaboration and trying to dig deeper. And when I've been at conferences or user groups, I always ask that question when I'm talking to people kind of after the fact. Is I always ask people like, how much do you like really get to talk to people about the stuff that you're working on or whatever? And the majority are always like, never.
yeah,
I'm like, I don't know how any of this is ever, how anybody's supposed to be writing like really useful software if you have no idea what the hell the problem is. Like
yeah.
if you
It's
vaguely know what the problem is, like, you know what I mean? Like I don't, I feel like this is kind of one of
yeah,
those things that like things like domain driven design and collaboration and you know what I mean, and being immersed in the domain, and it's like clearly that didn't really happen or really kick things off to a certain degree. Like I know there's a lot of people
because
interested in
the
it,
book
but
is too big. That's why
well, not
the
even
book
that.
has too many technical
I don't
things.
even mean the book necessarily. Just this
I'm
idea
just
of
joking.
if you're in, yeah, I mean, if you're writing kind of line of
Yeah,
business type work, bigger systems, not even necessarily bigger systems, I guess, but things that are really at the core, the heart of what a company does.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, like I think the best way you put it is like, I don't know if you call it a feature factory, but that's kind of what it is. It's like there's other people deciding what these things should be when it needs to be a mutual thing between, you know what I mean, people writing the software and people in the domain that are running the business, not this segregation. And I feel like that's actually the best way to put this, is that I feel like what I said earlier of like, hey, we're problem solvers. I feel like there's, hey, we're problem solvers, but don't talk to me too much. Just tell me what your problems are. I don't want to know anything else. Like, give me one-liners and I'll fix it. It's like, no, that's
yeah,
not how this works. That's maybe a better way of describing it. It's like, hey, let me fix your problems, but I really don't really want to know that much about what the problems are. It's like, no,
yeah,
it doesn't work that
yeah,
way. Like, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, it doesn't work that way
I
at
don't
all.
actually want to take the 2 weeks of job shadowing you to figure out what
Yeah.
you're doing.
Yeah, or talking to like 100 people to figure out, what all the actual nuances of the flow of something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it makes me think of kind of the jobs that I've had, which I can run through really quickly now. Like I mentioned the first one with the automotive financial stuff. Like most of the features, like we'll call them features, like I wasn't a part of that. But like the features were being determined by like worked through with people who were like seasoned in the industry and they knew what needed to be done. So yeah, we would every cycle or whatever, which was 2 months or whatever the number was, agile like, I guess. Um, we'd get, you know, requirements, I guess, per feature. But then they had they had the names of the like subject matter experts who were a part of deciding what that was going to be. So I could literally walk over in the office, like, or set up an appointment, whatever, but set up a meeting and literally sit down and talk with like this person who's been in the industry for like 30 years. Should I do this or should I do that? Or what does this do? Why is that? Um, and there are some times where I literally was doing like data importing for like accounting, like accountants in the industry, and like literally having to sit with them for like 2-3 hours at a time to just like get me to understand what they like, the really basics of what they want me to do, right? So it's like I remember doing that, and then in the next big project was the insurance one that I'd mentioned. Um, yeah, and I mean that they're very detailed requirements of like here's like I'd already mentioned, like here's how you calculate the policies and the numbers and everything. Like um, I think that was more cut and dry just because they had already like figured everything out, right? It's like you fill this stuff out, you can't do this before that. Like very well done. But but yeah, like I did have access to ask people in the insurance company like questions about things, and that opportunity was there. Um, yeah, and the last company I was in, I did not have nothing like nothing close to those, which I would describe as the feature factory for sure. And yeah, it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference as far as I guess just like knowing the right things are being worked on, I think is maybe what it is.
How do you think? Because you mentioned like accounting, I always felt like a big change for me too was, and I would love to give credit to whoever I heard this from, made the statement of like follow the money. And once I actually understood that in any system that I was working in, is follow the money from beginning to end, especially at the end. And also, once I understood accounting, because I worked at an accounting system, is everything else at that point seemingly became more clear on how systems work, and
Yeah.
following the money and like the
Was
process
that
of
with like
workflow.
event? Was that in context of like event storming maybe? Or
It could have been,
like that kind of,
yeah,
there's another one, I forget what it's called.
that very well.
Value mapping or
Value
something
stream
like that.
mapping. Yeah, I don't know where, who, or
Yeah.
what, but I've heard that idea before of like probably in the event
Yeah.
storming or event, at least trying to map that out is I, yeah, it's following the money, and it's to me that's, yeah, dead money. Like that makes a ton of sense because
Yeah.
you can follow the whole process that way, and then as well as I think about, even the project where I'm working on now, we don't deal with accounting directly, but I do a lot of the integrations with accounting systems to move data to the accounting systems. And it, like right from the beginning, it made sense to me because you're, how you're tracking certain costs, how you're tracking revenue, what accounts is it going to go into, how people would break these things down, and they all do it a little bit differently. But without knowing accounting, it would have seemed a little bit more foreign to me. It maybe wouldn't have been as clear or made as much sense. So I do think that if I were to give any advice to anybody, it would be understand, follow the money, understand accounting, understand from the
Yeah.
very beginning to the very end. And that I'm a little probably biased on this because, yeah, I've said this before in different places that one mentor that I had at one point was an accountant. Whether he knew he was my mentor or not, I don't know. But he was an accountant. I learned so much from an accountant in software, and I wasn't even working on accounting software at that time. So I don't know. I think accounting is, for me in the systems I've worked in now, it's like in hindsight, it's like, oh yeah, that's like super beneficial.
It is, and like I can give my own example. Like the system that I worked on previously was like kind of their main thing. They did a lot of different things, but their core was like booking time off, booking vacation. Which, yeah, I mean, if you're doing like the typical relational CRUD kind of approach to that, it can get pretty messy, hard to understand what's going on. Um, and this kind of goes into like event sourcing, but it's accounting, right? So it's like that idea of like if I send you money, if I send you $1,000 and I actually meant to send 500, the bank will return the $1,000 and then I will send 500.
Yep.
You won't return the difference to me.
Correct. Yeah.
And so there's like concepts like that, right? Where it's like append only. Also. So I mean, you apply that to, instead of money, it's just like hours, and each account, if you want to call it that, which would just correspond to like a kind of time off that you can have, like vacation or appointments or whatever. you cap them. I mean, really, at its fundamental level, like, that's basically what you need to do, right? Like, yeah. So and then that gets into whole other things. Like, if you do take that approach, it makes forecasting and things like that a lot easier. I mean, auditing for free, like just all those kinds of things, right? Which is, again, that is an accounting concept kind of applied to software, with event sourcing kind of being the implementation. But
Yeah, I remember.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting how that works.
I remember explaining event sourcing to that accountant that I'm referring to, and after going on for like 20 minutes about it, he looked at me and said, like, "You're just figuring this out." He's like, "Why isn't all software written this way?" I'm like, "I don't know, but this is coming from an accountant, and this is how they work." So but he was kind of like, "Yeah, like, what are you talking about? Like, this is like normal to me." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess that's true." Yeah.
So it's like when we take the way they would do it on paper, it's like we have to use relational tables and we have to normalize everything. And the accountant's like, just store the thing you did.
Yeah, and just add it all up together, and there's your net.
Funny.
There
It's
you
funny.
go. Yeah.
It's funny how that works.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like conversations that I had with him over accounting, over some of the how that money flows and understanding how the money flows. That's made a big impact, I think, for sure. And like I said, it's one of the things that I don't know how to. I keep saying I'm going to do more of it, and I need to, on some of those kind of some of those topics. I just don't know how to. I got to figure out how to present it in a way, because I'm still not sure. I still got to distill that in my tiny brain about how I could present some of these ideas that I think are applicable to a lot of different domains people are working in. They're not exactly the same. You got to like understand a little bit and then like overlay it into what you're working in.
Yeah.
So